Hello and welcome to week two's review of the Learn xAPI MOOC. I'm Martin Cousins and I'm joined by Ben Betts. Ben, we're going to keep this fairly short and sweet based on how many questions we might get from people who might be watching this. But can I just chuck it over to you to start with? What's your kind of review of what we've been doing in week two of the MOOC?
So a couple of interesting things come out of week two for me. Some on the tech side, some on the strategy side. On the tech side, what went down really well is a few people actually getting into, exporting some data from an LRS, putting it into a spreadsheet, seeing some graphs come out that they learned some things from that they hadn't before, and just that getting to some visualizations of activity and things like that, I think started sparking some things for some people and made it a little bit more concrete. So we're working now to try and produce some more of those sorts of exercises, because I think those went down really well, really quite practical, sort of this is what you do, this is how you deal with it sort of routine. So we're working on some more content there in response to people there. The strategy side, I saw a few things. There was some probably more discussion on the strategy side than on the tech side, and there, there was a few musings about what's L&D's role in things and whether we should be measuring stuff that's outside of learning and linking it to performance. A lot more questions than answers. I think that's natural. I think that's right. I don't necessarily think we're asking people to come on the MOOC to give them the answers. I think we're hoping to create the space for them to form their own opinions. So I think if people are coming in expecting us to knock out an answer for them for their specific questions, you'll be lucky, unless it happens to just be something specific or technical. So a lot more questions than answers maybe, but I think that's the nature of the experience.
So picking up on that, so we're talking about a sort of a tech track that's going into detail and the strategy track that's basically looking beyond L&D, I think. There was a great, I'm just going to pick up on a quote from Andrew, or not a quote, but a comment from Andrew Gherkins, who was talking about, if we talk about, should we be talking about learning and learners, or should we be talking about working and workers? Because it seems to me there's this big opportunity here, isn't there? Anyone who's interested in the performance of a business is going to be interested in what xAPI could do. So actually, there's, we may not be getting the answers, but we're feeling our way into something that could be very significant for businesses.
Oh, hugely significant. And I think there's lots of different ways to cut this. There's lots of arguments to be had here. That we weren't always focused on the performance of the business, and now that we somehow can be, is a bit dodgy territory, because a lot of L&D is focused around that training piece, that link to performance. And so saying that, oh, now you magically can do this where you never could before. Well, people could and should have been looking at that. That should have been the purpose of what they were doing for most of the time. So, I don't think philosophically it's changed. It's just that technically there's some ways to go about doing some of this now. One thing that I actually really like the phrase data supply chain. Someone else referenced it as the data value chain or something like that. Yeah, okay. I absolutely take it or leave it. I think the biggest problem for me is that if we're actually going to get to some of those performance measures, then you are going to have to interface with the rest of the business. You are going to have to get stats off other people, data out of other people. And it might not be realistic that the change is coming from L&D, because we're kind of, I feel like we're coming late to the party. Oh, hey, look, maybe we can measure some stuff now. Oh, can you give us all your data? And everyone else is going to be like, whoa, I've been sat here doing this for years, mate. What are you doing? So there's some wider questions there about how all of that comes in. And I don't necessarily think that's going to be easy or straightforward. Barry Sampson's been writing a week-by-week blog that I read with good passion, and he came up with a couple of interesting points. One of his points was just to go to the other side of what we've been suggesting you might use the xAPI for, which was about how you improve the L&D materials and the stuff that you're already doing. So how do you measure that, and how do you do that? And Barry's point was, well, where the hell am I getting the money to redo materials? Surely the business's point is going to be, hey, look, you should be getting this right first time. I'm not going to give you more money just to change it based on some feedback and all of that. And I agree, but I also disagree. I think this is the mindset that we're trying to push towards here, which is probably evident in the way we make these MOOCs, is being just in time, is being lean in the way in which you roll out learning and performance programs. And so instead of thinking about the big capital expenditure, the big 6-month project to build all the things, to put them all in place, what we're kind of advocating is a much more lean approach. Do something very quick, get it out there, measure it, tweak it, go from there. So really, we're trying to advocate, or at least I'm trying to advocate, just a shift in the big project learning, and then saying that we got it wrong because measurement says we got it wrong, giving me some more budget. Yeah, I don't think that's particularly compelling. But saying, okay, instead of having a 6-month lead time, I've got a 2-week lead time, but you're going to spend that budget through the iterations that we go every 2 weeks, taking a much more agile approach to seeing what actually affects people's performance, what actually helps them. I think that's it. I think it's madness that we're spending 6 months of our time building programs and then wondering whether they're any good at the end of it. You've got to be iterating as you go.
So, kind of building on that idea, there was some discussion on what we already use. So that I get that as the way to go. But what about this kind of SCORM legacy and the systems that really are very deeply embedded in some organisations? So there's been some discussion in the MOOC about that. So how do you see that playing out in terms of, there are measures that are being used. You're going to go back to the business and say, actually, we've got this whole new methodology here. How's that going to go down? And how do you...
Badly, probably. I mean, I think there's a few things to say about SCORM. I mean, look, the xAPI will not replace SCORM in some of the things that it does. You think about the other elements of what SCORM does in terms of sequencing, navigation, and dependencies and equivalencies, and a whole ton of stuff that the xAPI does not care about. The xAPI is a specification for some web services to push data around the place. So they are different animals. I think there's two things that I'd be considering. One is, what's the single point of truth, as it were, for L&D data? Because if you now got SCORMy stuff, legacy stuff here, and some xAPI stuff over here, at some point you're going to have to aggregate these to face off to the organization with a single endpoint that is, look, here's our aggregated data for you. And it doesn't matter that you do that with xAPI or something else, but I think there's a recognition, and increasingly we're working with clients to say, they've got a recognition, look, we've got some stuff in our LMS here, it's SCORMified, we've also got some xAPI stuff. What I actually want to do is take some of this data from SCORM, plug it into the learning record store, and then have that be the single point of truth, because I can see the learning record store going somewhere in the future and doing more for us. It's going to need to take that data, but it's also going to take in data from elsewhere. And generally speaking, LMSs aren't necessarily set up to just take random data, random unstructured data about your activities and kind of store it in a way like that without them being a learning record store or having some sort of data warehouse. They're set up to take the activities that are specified within the LMS. Mm-hmm. So I can see a good case for saying, look, we're gonna translate some of this SCORM stuff into xAPI so that we can start having one place in which we collect this sort of L&D data. I don't think you're going to replace it. I would have serious considerations about whether SCORM is the way to go for my next big chunk of spend or whatever, but it's bigger than xAPI. It's a bigger decision there because it plays back to my earlier comment about a lean methodology for how you develop things. It's a big change. It's not something people will go to straight away. I don't think you've got to panic. I think there's you don't have to panic that you've wasted. It's not the same conversation. We're still having the Flash to HTML5 conversation about all of the e-learning stuff that's there. I'm not saying, all right, you got rid of the Flash, you got to HTML5, now get rid of SCORM, go to xAPI. It's a bit of a panicky reaction to something. It's a needs must sort of basis.
So my final question today would be, we're halfway through the MOOC in terms of it being a sort of live synchronous experience. We're halfway through that bit. Through your participation and the comments that you've seen and others' participation, what if you would take a temperature check of where people are at on xAPI, what would be your kind of conclusion at the moment?
It's difficult to know because you only see the people who are engaged enough to comment and to contribute, and so maybe there are quite a few people who aren't necessarily contributing a lot. That's fine. So but it's difficult to know the semantics of that, whether they're sitting there going, "Oh, this is really crap," or whether actually they're just silent lurkers and that's what they prefer to do. My gauge is that we're starting to do something quite exciting here. We're talking to regular L&D folk that weren't necessarily hugely technical or weren't necessarily hugely bought into this at the ground floor, and starting to get some, I can see some cogs whirring. Some people are sparking off ideas and starting to understand why it might be exciting, why it might be different, and the other mindsets that it plays into. I'm really excited. I think I'm seeing evidence that when we've got 500-600 people signed up to something that should be really dry and actually visibly getting excited about, okay, this means I could do this, this means I should go there, this is changing my thinking, this is doing all of that. It's a really exciting time, but I do think it's much wider than xAPI as a thing. That's like a little enabling tool that could be part of the way we transform to a more lean way, to a more performance-orientated way, to being more about working than being about learning. So really, it's just a wrapper for everything that's exciting at the moment. So I think it's going very well. I think I'm excited to see people click and get it in different ways. Not get it technically as in, oh, I fully understand the spec here. Most people will never read that spec and understand it, and it's not important. What is important is that it starts to see the learning ecosystem, and that we start to see a path towards becoming experienced designers more than we do just sort of instructional designers.
Ben, that's great. And my final point is, if you're watching this and you have signed up and you haven't started in the MOOC, then you can have that experience now. There's no, as we said, it's lean, it's agile. Just come to it and look at what people are doing and how they're participating, and you can just pick up on that. And if you are in the MOOC, then we look forward to seeing you back in there, and keep an eye on the Twitter chat tonight, learn xAPI hashtag. But Ben, that's been really good. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Martin. Cheers all. Bye-bye.